Okay. It is a particular pleasure for me to be with you today and to start this work, which we have thought about together for such a long time. It is such a joy to be in Bhutan, which leads the world in showing that the Buddha's teaching is not just words, but it can actually be translated into real policies and a way of life. I want to talk to you today here as head of Species Protection for NABU International, a German NGO that is the manager of this program, and as Secretary for Environment and Conservation of the International Buddhist Federation. Great thanks to the International Alliance Against Health Risks in Wildlife Trade for sponsoring this initiative. I would like to go back 10,000 years, the comma is in the wrong place, 10,000 years ago, wildlife made up 99% of vertebrate biomass, and humans made up 1%. Now today, guess what it is today? Today, it's completely changed. We have turned the situation on its head, and we are now making up 96% with our livestock and domestic animals. I don't really want to call them livestock, our domestic animals, and 4% wildlife. So that's a huge situation. And these changes have not been without consequence for our planet. We've changed already 3/4 of the land environment and 2/3 of the oceans. If we look at extinction rates across different groups of vertebrates, you can see that all vertebrate species, those are animals with backbones, all vertebrate species have been affected, from amphibians to birds, mammals, reptiles, and fish. And these extinction rates are occurring faster and faster. What's the reason for this? If you look at the rate of extinction and human population growth, you can see that with growing human population, we are pushing animals literally off the face of the earth. We have already lost in the last 150 years alone 82% of wild mammal biomass and more than 40% of the planet's plant biomass. And these components, these elements, natural elements, are not just ornaments. They are part of what makes up our life support system. So by destroying this, we are destroying the life support system of our planet. There are 5 main factors that have been identified as the biggest problems behind this, and direct exploitation of wildlife is the second biggest one, bigger than climate change at the moment. Climate change will no doubt become more important as we move along in time. But changes in land use and changes in the ocean are the second largest drivers of this. And this is also related to the development of pandemics, particularly in the way we treat domestic and wild animals. And I would like to particularly address the problem of wildlife trade today, and to implore you that, nature conservation is the key to protecting not just our own livelihoods, but our health. Around 70% of all newly emerging infectious diseases, as well as almost all pandemics, originate from animals. Now, that's not the animal's fault. And I'll come to that in a minute. It comes from the way we treat them. So, and about 65%, so roughly 2/3 of those, can be traced back to wild animals. And these microbes that live in animals, domestic and wild, spill over the more contact we have to us. They have contact with us, so they have the opportunity to get used to our bodies and to make themselves at home. So contact with wild animals, it per se increases the risk of the development of new pandemics and new zoonotic diseases. And the more violent and intensive that contact is, the more intense the risk of the development of new diseases is. And all stages in the trade chain of wildlife trade are involved in this, from whether the animals are captive bred and handled and slaughtered and skinned or whatever, or whether they are caught from the wild. Roughly 5 new infectious diseases rise every year, and each one of those has the potential to become a zoonotic. So we're really literally dicing with death here in terms of our health, our direct health impact. But environmental degradation and overexploitation have also been identified as driving pandemic risk and zoonotic risk. Land use changes, urbanization, and agricultural expansion account for more than 30% of all new disease cases. That's massive. So it's us doing that. It's not the animals' fault. It's how we interact with them. The consequences of exploitation are also more direct for the environment. It disrupts natural relationships between wildlife and their associated germs. If we go into the forest, we log, we take things out of it, we go into it, we disturb the natural mechanisms. And by doing so, we increase contact between wildlife, livestock, humans, and their pathogens, leading to zoonosis. The breeding and the trade and the use of wild animals have led to loss of biodiversity and the emergence of new diseases, such as COVID-19. So what we're seeing now is the direct result of our actions. So if you look at how many animals are traded, roughly a quarter of all wild terrestrial vertebrate species are traded worldwide. That's a massive amount. And for example, in COVID-19, people believe from the WHO, the researchers who went to China to look at the origins, feel now that it probably originated from wildlife farms in southern China, where the virus moved from wild bats to animals that were bred for consumption and then slaughtered and sold at the Wuhan market, where the actual pandemic took off from. So that's been the chain. So it's not the animal's fault, it's ours. And it's our responsibility to do something about it. And if we look at the potential of what could happen, there are currently roughly 1.7 million undetected viruses in mammals and birds. And of these, 500,000 to almost 1 million have the ability to infect humans. Now, today, even the UN and the WHO now acknowledge that what we do to nature and to animals is the cause of these pandemics. And for viruses, it's completely irrelevant whether trade is sustainable or whether it's legal or whether it's unsustainable or whether it comes from captive animals or wild caught ones. All it wants and needs to adapt itself to us is contact with wild animals. So we need to do a bit of respectful social distancing towards wild animals. But conversely, research has shown that if we're reducing, therefore, environmental damage, we can reduce the pandemic risk, which would be good news for all of us. And global strategies to prevent pandemics would be 100 times less costly than the cost of fighting these pandemics once we're dealing with them. So there's a strong economic incentive to go the route of prevention as well. As Buddhists, we know that we are all one. And this concept is also reflected in the One Health approach, which says that if we have a healthy environment, I'm sorry, this is German here, the writing on the graphic, I only noticed. If we have a healthy environment at the top and a healthy wildlife and healthy animals, we also have healthy people. And to bring these changes about, everybody needs to do their bit, from individuals, each of us, to our families, our communities, our countries, and our whole species. So more and more initiatives come into action, into play, to try and reduce the risk of pandemics. This includes the initiative by the German government, which brought into life the International Alliance Against Health Risks in Wildlife Trade, by trying to support actions around the world to reduce the risk for new pandemics. Now, if you look at this map, shows you where scientists believe the hotspots are for the development of new zoonotic diseases from wildlife. And you can see that Asia and Southeast Asia are, together with some parts of Africa, are really some of the main focal points where we can expect new diseases to emerge from. Also, if we look at this map that was developed by Professor Ripple, we can see that, that Southeast Asia in particular, again, is an area where mammals are particularly threatened by hunting and trapping. For some reason, I can't get to the next slide. Oh, yes, I can. No, I can't. Now, if we look at where the world's Buddhists live, it is slightly embarrassing that we live where all these hotspots are for, as potential pressure cookers for big problems in the future, both in terms of biodiversity destruction and in terms of the development of new zoonotic diseases and potential pandemics. So what can we do about it? John Sterman is a scientist in the States, and he said that research shows that showing people research doesn't work. And we can all see that by the fact that people smoke, because we've known how bad smoking is for decades, and people still smoke. So we need to find a different way to get to people to change their behavior by talking to their values, talking to them about the things that really matter to them, that make them make better decisions. And as Buddhists, we are particularly already primed, I guess, in a way to take this on board, because the Dharma teaches us that other beings are our brothers and our sisters, and it recognizes and respects not only their sentience and ability to experience pain, fear, and suffering, but the fact that we are all connected. Everything on earth is connected, and cause and effect, and universal responsibility. In fact, we are one, something ecology and animal welfare science teaches us as well today. So as we tackle the COVID pandemic, we therefore also must tackle an even more serious and toxic pandemic, namely that is caused by emissions not of CO2, but by emissions of greed and hatred, and the delusion of seeking happiness through possessions and external experiences, and in the pursuit of that tramples over everything in its path. Climate change, biodiversity loss, food and water scarcity, and pollution are just symptoms of this underlying cause. And we can help, and we've done so in the past. I would like to talk to you about this project that we did in the mid-2000s to do with tigers. It was called the Tibetan Conservation Awareness Campaign. In 2005, the UN Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Fauna and Flora identified the use and the smuggling of tiger skins to China by Himalayan communities as the main threat to the species. And it wasn't just tigers that were smuggled, but it was also leopards and otters that were moved from India and Nepal, for example, and Bhutan and so on, into China. And then on the way back, the skins and wool of Tibetan antelopes would be brought back for the weaving of chartreuse shawls. Now, illegal wildlife trade, this is part of illegal wildlife trade, which is worth billions of dollars every year, and is second only to the illegal trade in drugs. So, and some 350 million wild animals and plants are bought and sold around the world each year. It's massive. Imagine the biological and welfare misery that is involved in this process. So why did the Tibetans or the Himalayan communities do this? The use of tiger skins and other skins is a traditional practice. They were using these skins as trim on the traditional robes, and you can see that here. This is are some Tibetans in their finery. You can see the tiger trim, which is the most expensive, on the left. In the center, you see a gentleman with a fox hat, otter skin trim around his waist. And on the right-hand side, you see a gentleman with leopard skin and otter trim on his chuba. That's traditional robe. And when I first heard about this with my colleague, Ashok Kumar, now sadly deceased, I said, well, Ashok, why are they doing this? Aren't they Buddhists? Why are they using fur? And I wasn't a Buddhist then, at least not a card-carrying Buddhist. And I said, I don't understand. Aren't they supposed to not, aren't Buddhists are all about not doing harm? So this is somebody's skin. How come they're using that? So I thought, what could be done? So perhaps write to and ask for help from His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. And I really didn't expect him to respond, but he responded with overwhelming kindness and support. So we launched together, and this was me many years ago, with His Holiness in Delhi at the launch of the Tibetan Conservation Campaign, where His Holiness said, we are Buddhists first, Tibetans second. And he used even stronger words. He said, I am ashamed and I don't feel like living when I see all those pictures of people decorating themselves with skins and furs. And we took the message of His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, and put it into public awareness materials. This was before the internet was really big. Now it's much easier to reach people. And it was spread around communities, Buddhist communities around the world, and pledges were collected. People pledged they will never do this again. The people who carried out this campaign on the ground went to settlements, to Buddhist festivals, to schools, to universities, to carry this message with the help of the monastic communities, which made it possible. And the result was unprecedented in the history of conservation. I have been a conservation scientist for over 30 years, and I had never seen anything like it. People gathered in monasteries in Tibet and ripped the trim off their chubas, and collected other fur items. Like in the center of this photo, you can see a blanket made from cat skins. On the floor, you can also see fox and cat skins. And these are very expensive, prized possessions that cost a lot of money and were their pride and joy and part of their cultural identity. And yet, compassion and wisdom won over in their hearts over what to do. So they ripped all this off in front of monasteries. You can see the monastery in the background, all across Tibet, and in Nepal, and in India, in the settlements of people living there in exile. And they piled them all up, and amongst prayers, set fire to them. A UK news channel, one of the biggest UK news channels, called this the most effective conservation campaign ever. And the wonderful thing about it was that it lasted, its effect lasted, because it didn't go just through people's heads, it went through people's hearts. It talked to their core values. So to this day, this trade is still suppressed. But within 6 months after this campaign was started, the prices for tiger skins in Tibet fell by 2/3. Leopard skin prices dropped by 90%. And few Tibetans still buy this anymore. It's become socially unacceptable to do this. And we can do it again. And it's a particular joy to me to do this with our colleagues from the Bhutan Ecological Society and the much esteemed and respected and frankly loved monastic community in Bhutan. Bhutan is such an amazing country and an example that size really doesn't matter. You have protected 70% of your land area is covered with forests. You're carbon neutral, and you have an amazing network of protected areas. And as a result, is characterized by a remarkable diversity and abundance of wild species. I don't need to tell you this. I think, I really look forward to the talk of the wildlife, the man from the forest department, the gentleman from the forest department. Your wildlife is so rich and so wonderful, and we must stop it being sucked out of the country by ruthless people who wish to profit from it. Bhutan has many porous borders in inaccessible terrain. Your borders are very difficult to control, and people are tempted by money all around the world. We're all human. And we want to help with you, and we're grateful to support you in your efforts to stop the illegal trade. So over the past 2 decades in Bhutan, the number of reported cases of poaching and arrests in connection with illegal wildlife trade have been on the rise. And affected species include not just tigers and leopards, but also bears and musk deer and wild boar, elephants, rhinos, clouded leopards, pangolins, and monal, pythons, pheasants, many, many more. So in the 3 years leading up to 2020, some 44,000 wildlife crimes were reported in Bhutan, and most were linked to illegal timber and wildlife trade. And the reasons for this include a growing demand in other countries, and it's difficult to patrol the borders between China and India and Bhutan, and lack of enforcement capacity is causing a problem. So what we're trying to do is to do, with you together, to support you in every way we can, a public awareness demand reduction initiative that draws on the fundamental Buddhist principles of compassion towards all life, our universal responsibility, and the recognition of universal interdependence. May all beings be free from suffering. Thank you for listening to me, and I look forward to the rest of the meeting. Thank you.